All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone. And I'm back with another Learning Tech Talks where I'm exploring the landscape of learning tech and workplace tech. I still got to get this intro right. In a last minute pivot, you may have noticed that the topic of conversation is different than planned. I had a bit of a last minute communication shift. So guess what? You get me today. And no worries, though. I've got a packed agenda. I have a ton of things that I've been wanting to go over and talk about with folks, but just haven't been able to make time. So this actually fits into the agenda well. So today's going to be a little more fluid. You have a little less notice as to what's going up, but essentially today's topic is about what's going on in tech, but I'm really going to be talking about my take on what's happening with the industry and how that relates to learning in tech. So the one thing I will tell you is, one, we're going to get started sooner than usual because I don't have any icebreakers or anything planned. I don't need to introduce any guests. So we're just going to dive right in. But I would also encourage any of you to ask your questions along the way. If you've been part of my solo discussions before, I much prefer them to be a dialogue with you. Make sure we're tapping on to the questions that you have versus me just talking. But I think with that, you can tell I'm where I always am. And yeah, we got a lot to get into. So let's just get started with it. A couple things. Here's the structure of how I'm going to go through this. And again, if you ask questions, I'll pivot along the way. But the overall path that I'm planning on taking with this is I want to highlight some of the big key trends that I'm seeing happening in the conversations I have with organizations globally, but then also just some of the latest research that's happening and things like that, informal through the community along the way. And from there, I'm going to tie it into a combination of learning, what's happening kind of in the more general learning space, and specifically tie that back to tech. So that's going to be the general flow as we go through it. Again, flexible as always. But let's start with some of these trends. There are 4 that I thought I would highlight. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll see some of the research that this is coming out of along the way. But one of the biggest ones right now is, in almost every conversation I have, our managers right now are having a really tough time. Frontline managers all the way up to the top. This has been a big adjustment period, and they've been yo-yoed around a lot. Whether it's, your workforce is distributed, then they're coming back. No, wait, they're not coming back. They're going to be hybrid. You're going to have some people here. They're not going to be here. What are expectations? We as a company are shifting on our performance and expectations along the way. So all sorts of things going out to folks, and where that lands is it's putting a huge burden. I think I won't specifically, don't quote me on the numbers because I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong, but somewhere along the lines of managers are 10 times more burdened right now than they have been in the past. I think anybody in L&D or HR or in any sort of people leader function knows that when managers are languishing, everything goes along with that. So I think that's something we're going to need to keep a close eye on. And you're going to see how I think we're going to be able to address some of these things with what's happening and learning along the way. But our managers need help right now. And I think that's an important message for learning leaders to think about, not just in terms of, and you'll see we're going to talk about this in terms of how we approach it, but this is more than just, so let's push more leadership programs. Let's push more leadership content. That's not necessarily the solution I'm going to advocate for on this, but I think some great awareness needs to go to this on the manager side of things. The other trend that is big, if you're not talking to your talent acquisition folks, I would encourage anybody in the learning space to build those relationships. You're going to hear kind of one of my takes on how the lines between L&D and other functions are rapidly degrading for good reasons, and it's a much needed shift. So I think this is something that needs to happen. But if you're not talking to your talent acquisition leaders right now, spend some time with them, because I think this may help you shift some of your priorities, because the reality is right now, the talent market is ridiculously competitive. I mean, it is hot right now. People are getting pinged for jobs. Different things are happening left and right. They're getting paid way over market price, way over market value for things. And that's making it very difficult not only to recruit new talent, but you can imagine what happens when new talent comes into an organization. I don't know about anybody else, but I always go through that phase where after a few months, you're kind of asking yourself, was this the right call? Was this the right decision? Did I make the right move? And if there are some major gaps in that, it is going to contribute to the decision of, All right, well, I think it's time for me to depart. So I think on that sense, we got to think about how are we doing that? Now, what does that actually mean for us and what should we actually look at on this? The lines going back to, I'm talking about functional lines here. And yes, is there opportunity for our functional boundaries to degrade? Yes, but the same is true. And that's why I'm changing the intro to the show from just learning tech to learning and workplace tech. Because the reality is, we have to be consumer grade and we cannot be driving a separate learning strategy from our digital workplace strategy. I've had a number of conversations with organizations recently about how are we aligning what we're doing from a learning and development standpoint with our overall digital workplace strategy. Because if we're not doing that, it's creating a user experience that is maybe historically has been acceptable. We've maybe gotten away with it. We've maybe been able to pull that off. That's now becoming a competitive disadvantage in the marketplace. We actually, again, have had a number of conversations with talent acquisition leaders recently where they are losing people in those early months because of the workplace experience. And while that's not fully within our control, we can't say, well, that's us, we own that. Are we playing a much larger role in workplace experience than we ever have before? Absolutely. Or we should be. If we're not, that needs to shift our strategies in terms of how we're thinking about things. So I think that whole blend of how are we combining workplace learning and learning tech is a big piece, because if it's a distinct separate strategy, you're still kind of focused on how do we build our own panacea, ask people to disrupt their workflow, disrupt what they're doing, and do something else. It's going to become not just a problem from a feedback, our engagement surveys, things like that, but it's actually leading to attrition. It's leading to disengagement. It's leading to some of these problems we're tying on. So again, talent market is having a major effect, major part of the conversation. The other one is, I read a recent report on this. Well-being is crushing the workforce right now. I think you'll see one of the topics I talk about is coaching as a rising trend. It's been rising for a bit, but I think part of the reason we're seeing such an explosive growth in this is the fact people are struggling just to hang on right now. Is it getting better in some areas? Yes. And one of the interesting reports I think I sent out last month in my newsletter, it's for surprising reasons. It may not be for the reasons you think. I think there was a lot of thought that, well, the reason is people feel disconnected, they feel alone, they feel like they aren't connected to their workers, their coworkers. That may not necessarily be the case, but the reality is burnout is hitting people really hard. Figuring out career pathing, how, what is the vision for where I'm going? Do I feel like I have a future casting forward? It's absolutely destroying the workforce. And I think this is as an enablement function, we have to take this seriously, because if our approach to this is, well, let's just keep stacking on top of, let's make learning something, we talk a lot about wanting to build a learning culture. And a lot of times that conversation goes, well, we want people actively doing this, and we want them doing this, and we want them consuming this. To a workforce that right now is trying to figure out how to keep their head above water in terms of just their day-to-day activities, even with the best intentions, that is going to feel like a burden. It's going to feel like a burden to folks who are already struggling to just keep tabs on what are they doing today. So that shifts the way we think about things. And now, I personally think this is something that is a good shift, not just because of the circumstances. Would I say, well, once we get through this, we can pivot away and go back to, just piling on top of folks? No. I'm a firm believer that learning should feel like work and work should feel like learning. They should be seamless. But is that need to do that higher than it ever has been because we're dealing with a workforce that is struggling to make it through the day? Absolutely. And this goes back to the previous industry trend point, which is the talent marketplace is competitive. So if what we're doing is extremely burdensome to people, if they feel like they're coming in and what's being provided to them to help them actually feels like a hindrance or a lead-filled backpack being attached to their back, we're actually going to have direct impact on things like retention, like employee engagement, like employee satisfaction, like employer brand. I mean, this has major implications. Now, is this all doom and gloom and saying learning and development, it's on you to figure this out? No, But I think one of the things that isn't always happening is drawing those connections back and thinking about how can we do a better job and how can we tie this. I had a community meetup this month where we talked specifically about how are we measuring impact? How are we actually assessing what we're doing? And the need and the desire to move beyond completions it's there, but I think that opportunity to say, well, then how are we actually tying that back? And how are we telling the compelling stories of we did this, it had this kind of impact. As a result, this is how the business was positively impacted, or how we mitigated risk to the organization. The last and final one, and there's more than I would probably go into. I would probably go into even more on this. There's probably more than 4. So if you're saying, well, industry trends, we got 4, that's what we got. Well, that's what I got coming off the top of my head about 5 minutes before going live. So the fourth one on this one is skills is still a hot topic of conversation right now. I don't think I've left a conversation with learning or business or HR leaders that hasn't had something to do with skills, talking about skills, the need for identifying skills, figuring out what the gaps, filling gaps, upskill, reskill, right skill. I mean, you throw the word skill into something and it'll fit into a conversation today. Now, 2 things on that one though. What I'm still seeing, and this is an opportunity area that is emerging, and I'm seeing the tech catch up to the needs of the organization, but I think we need to be driving this conversation as L&D leaders, because what we demand, the industry follows. And if we're still asking for the same stuff, we're going to get more of the same. If we're saying we need something different, it's going to push the industry to go there. And what I'm seeing with this is there's still opportunity for us to get better at identifying what legitimately are the gaps in the organization. There's still a lot of spaghetti being thrown at the walls. And again, best intentions. We've got some data points. We're doing some different things. We're trying to do some analysis. But in terms of this predictive, we know what's going on. We know where we need to be. We know how we get where we need to go. I had a conversation with Kian, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where we talked at length about this. And this is a combination of tech and provider effort that has to go into this. This is not something we can just sit back and wait for the LMS, LXP, EXP market to catch up and solve this problem for us. Because even in that conversation, we talked about the fact we need to be having those conversations with our business leaders around what really are we needing to be able to do over the next 12 to 18, 24, 36 months. And where are we today? How are we actually driving that? Now that can be a complete cluster. Candidly, this can be a conversation that's unfamiliar. And again, if you want to see what you might have to do, I would highly recommend checking out the conversation with Kian, because we did dig deep into what do we actually need to do with this and how might we approach this. The good news is tech is helping tremendously. The reality is trying to do this through analog methods, it's impossible. So if your goal is to still try and figure out your skill gaps, assess where the needs are, and figure out what you need to do, if you're still doing that by scouring Excel spreadsheets or hoping that your analytics team can go through and identify all that stuff, looking at some trend reports, you're not going to be able to keep up. This is kind of the catch-22 we've got ourselves stuck in the past, where we've ended up, by the time we can even get to a possible outcome, we're too late. And that's only going to get worse as the skills, half-life diminishes. Now, there's a couple strategies behind this. One I talked about was the tech piece. Tech is helping massively. AI can scour and identify trends and data points far faster and at a far larger scale than we ever can as humans. This is a great place to lean on your tech, to lean on AI and trust it. Now, does that mean blind trust? Just let it, make the decisions for you? No, but to actually scour and identify some of these trends, bring up insights and say, hey, I think this might be where you need to go, because it can look at the whole industry, market trends, your internal trends, and come up with some insights that you would spend a decade trying to go through. So this is an opportunity from a tech standpoint that I think we can lean in more. Is there a need for our tech vendor friends, those of you I know you're listening to this as well, to go further on that from a measurement standpoint? I think this was a key part of the conversation Kian and I had, was How are we actually assessing that? And it's not through completions. Just because you finished a course or even the most well-designed program does not necessarily mean you have demonstratable skills. So how are we actually making sure that we're measuring, identifying what that looks like? And again, can tech help with that? Absolutely. But we also need to change our approach and the way we're thinking about this, the way we're having conversations. We talk a lot about focusing on the outcome, but how are we actually driving to that? And again, some very recent conversations have unpacked that far more than I'm going to be able to in the little bit of time that I have here. So those are some of the biggest ones. Those are the ones I would personally say, if you were to follow me around for, I don't know, a week, a couple weeks, I have no idea, the day, depending on the day, those would be the things you would hear in my conversations on a very regular basis. Those are the biggest ones affecting me personally and affecting those that I have conversations with. Now let's translate that over to what does that mean for L&D, and where are we seeing some of the rising trends, but not just trends for the sake of flavor of the week, but actually getting down to things that really need to happen within the org. So one of the first ones I continue to hear more about, I've had conversations, I actually kicked off the beginning of the year on this. Lots going on around cohort and hybrid learning. This is now the one thing I will say on this is what people mean when they're talking about this topic is still a bit all over the board. There are conversations I have where when people talk about hybrid learning, cohort learning, they're still talking about, well, we're moving into Zoom. I think that's starting to wane. Less people are just focused on purely shifting things from traditional classroom into the cloud. I'd say we've made some significant progress on that. Still some effort happening there. But I think in terms of really solid hybrid, I've talked to a couple organizations that are doing this really well. This whole idea of true cohort learning is a combination of flipping the classroom, changing the way you focus on live delivery, and then also spaced learning. How are you actually spacing this out in a meaningful way, with kind of the capstone of trying to really make this relevant to work? Because whenever I think of a cohort or hybrid learning program that's well designed, it's intentionally designed to seamlessly blend, kind of pulling you out of your day-to-day for reflection, some education piece, there's some components that, while at the same time keeping you really close to this. So I think this is an opportunity area. We still are working through some of these things. The conversations I have with folks are a bit all over the spectrum, but I think what I'm seeing from the data, some of the research reports, the folks that are doing cohort hybrid programs really well, is they are making a difference. They are making a significant difference in bridging that skills gap. I think one of the things that ties to this cohort learning, going back to the skills piece that both Keon and I talked about, and I've had a couple other conversations on this, is building skills is not a 20-minute exercise. Asking somebody to watch a YouTube video or go to a job aid is not going to build skills. And I think this is where we're seeing the rise in cohort learning, is the fact that there's a greater recognition that if we're actually asking people to build skills, we need them to commit time, effort, and resources to doing so. And that doesn't happen in a 2-day workshop. It just doesn't. I mean, is that a way to get their time and attention? Sure. But is that necessarily the time and space that they need for reflection, application, feedback, coaching along the way? It's not. So again, now I'm combining cohort and hybrid learning for two reasons. One, I think cohort learning is extremely effective if done in a hybrid way. Is there still opportunity for things to, be in person? Some people will ask, do you think anything ever should be in person? I think, sure, if it works, should there always be a virtual hybrid option? Yes. And I think that's one of the shifts that I am starting to see a bit of a trend where some folks are creeping back to this. Well, we're trying to kind of pull people back into traditional means. I think this is one of the biggest risks as we go into 2022 and beyond, as things with the pandemic settle down. That comfort zone, that familiarity is going to kick in. It's going to start trying to drag us back. And again, are there things that we can bring back from that? Maybe, but should we do it carefully? And should we not do it in the trade-off of excluding what we've learned and what we're able to do in a digital space. I think absolutely. So again, pulling it off well, I would say while there's opportunity for this, a lot of people haven't experienced good cohort learning yet. If you haven't been through a solid cohort program, there are a lot of them out there. I would highly encourage people to actually try and experience what a good cohort learning program is. I know, Andrew Barry and I have talked about it, and he's trying to do some things. I know my friends over at NovoEd have a program to try and help people. Intrepid's doing some similar things to try and help people understand what does it feel like to experience cohort learning and how do you get that right? Because there is this art to live collaboration, the opportunity to separate, education from application, the component of actually spacing this out. What is the right spacing? And I don't think there's a universal formula, which some folks are looking for. Well, what is it? How long should a cohort program be? Well, it depends. What skill are you trying to build? How complex are we looking to do this? Is this a trend I think we need to follow? Absolutely, especially for macro learning. You've seen me partnering and teaming up with the 7 Taps team a bunch. Is there room for micro learning? Absolutely, which I'll talk about in a minute here. Yes, there is. Does that replace or sunset macro learning? No. And with where the skill gap market is and where we need to grow, we can't move away from macro learning, because micro learning will never be a substitute or a replacement for macro learning. And I think that's where cohort learning is really something that's come into the spotlight as a result of the pandemic. And now I think we just need to continue refining and building that. Similar to when we first flipped things into virtual. Are they a little painful right now? Yeah, some of the things I've been through, some of the things I've had conversations with, people are learning. We're figuring it out. Will we get there? Absolutely. And I think we just need to continue moving that forward. Another one that I continue to have conversations on is this whole coaching mentoring space. I think it was maybe a couple months ago, I referenced Danny Johnson and Stasha over at Red Thread, Stacia. They're doing some incredible research, and they put out a great article on what's going on with the coaching tech market, because it is getting confusing. It is. It's tough. And I talked to, I don't remember who, Laura Chapin was on, and we were talking about this. But it is, well, is it coaching? Is it mentoring? Is it, where are we at? I think one of the things with this, we're going to continue to see this rise. The democratization of coaching is extremely valuable to the organization. This was reserved for the 1% of the organization. Now this is becoming a reality that organizations can start investing in their teams and offering this as a benefit. I think one of the biggest things with this right now is having a clear differentiation between, well, what are we talking about with, coaching versus mentoring, and where does that line divide? I know that I'm talking with Growth Space and have been talking with Growth Space about what they're doing and how are they differentiating these two, because there is a distinct difference, and one is solving a different problem than the other. And I think there's an opportunity for us to create distinct differences in how we're approaching these, and the tech is aligning differently. So again, if you're trying to solve a coaching problem, that's going to have a distinctly different path than a mentoring problem. And I think we need to be careful with that, because there's the tendency right now to say, well, coaching will be our one size fits all. If we get coaching right, we can absolutely solve all these things. Will it have impact on well-being? Yes. Can it have impact on performance? Yes. Can it help with the skill piece? Yes. Is it a complete replacement or substitute? No. And I think this is some of the distinction that we're going to have to work through as this trend rises, as more players flood into the market, as we see, similar to what happened with the LXP market, where suddenly everything was an LXP. I think we're going to see coaching do that same thing. So being able to differentiate, what are the actual capabilities? What are the problems we're trying to solve with this? And how do we choose between what solution provider may be able to best deliver on that is going to be an important thing for us as learning leaders to consider as we move through 2022 and beyond. Because again, is this one that I see going away? No, thankfully. And I'm really glad for that piece, because I think it's a huge opportunity in the org for us to address this unmet need that historically has just been impossible for us to meet. I mean, it really was. Analog coaching was not something we could ever, as an organization, or at least for most organizations, dream of offering to the entire workforce. And so to be able to do that now is really helpful. But with that one, and this is the watch out for learning leaders who may be thinking about this, we got to watch with expectations on our workforce. I had a conversation yesterday with someone, and we were talking about the fact that both JD and Matthew Daniel will be with me on the show later this month. And so we're going to be talking frontline workers. And this is a really important piece because sometimes it's easy, especially as we think about our workforce. A lot of times L&D, we're in corporate, and it's easy to think of corporate solutions for desk workers, and that's not always the case. This is true with coaching. We need to think about, how does this fit in for folks who aren't at a desk, may not have the flexibility to just schedule a meeting and take 30, 45 minutes to do that. So we need to think carefully about this. But the other piece that I think is important with that is the reputation of coaching is mixed. And I know when Laura and I chatted, she had a different perspective, and I'm totally, because I think some organizations are more mature than others. But the reality is, for some folks, being coached is not a good thing. And facing that elephant in the room is going to be really important if you're going to think about coaching for your organization. Where are you from a trust standpoint? Where are you from just in a culture standpoint? Where are your leaders as it relates to the relationships they have? Where are you at from an employee engagement standpoint? Because if you're not factoring that into this and pouring coaching or even mentoring out to the organization, it can have a backfiring effect. And I've seen it. I've talked to some other learning leaders who have rolled this out and they've been bit on the heel as they did this, thinking, hey, we're doing this great thing for the org and everyone's going to love it, and everybody knows how great coaching is. And that was not the response it was met with. So again, not to discourage people from going down this path. I think it's an important path we need to continue exploring, but I think we need to do so carefully. We need to evaluate other factors as we look at that and not do this blindly just because the tech's there. The tech maturity has come a long way. I think the tech is ahead of us from an industry standpoint in this category. I think now we've got some room to bring this back. Deborah, I'm going to bring your question up so that I can answer it here, because before I go too far down a path, because you're talking about the cohort learning. This actually kind of combines the two. So your question is, is cohort learning, could it be kind of a two-way experience where you're pairing up someone new with somebody with more work experience versus the one direction? I actually would say that's probably, to me, one of the most effective pieces of cohort. Now, how you structure this is going to depend, because keep in mind, logistically, this can have a major impact. I've worked with orgs where they, and actually, I just posted about this the other day from some I4CP research, where manager involvement, leader involvement in learning is actually one of the key differentiators between high performing and low performing organizations. So your opportunity here, what you're hitting at, is absolutely there, and I think absolutely valuable, because if you have those leaders involved in that process, is it going to drive greater effectiveness? My experience has said yes, based on some of the things I've seen. Don't underestimate the logistics that go with that. Trying to coordinate existing, more experienced folks with newer folks, it's can be a logistical burden. So again, not to discourage it, I absolutely think there's an opportunity for it, and it can have massive impact on effectiveness. Tread carefully and thoughtfully in this, and just be careful you're not promising, writing a check you can't cash, or not anticipating what would be the time, effort, and investment that's going to be required with this. Now, on the flip side of that, my take on this is, I think there are easier starting points for people when it comes to how do you make this a two-way experience? Because again, I think, and I would say you could go beyond two-way experience. I don't think this has to be a, one to two, A to B, back and forth type of a thing. Some of the best cohort programs that I've been involved with and helped architect have actually been designed to leverage the expertise and capability of all participants. to work together, to support each other, to actually use that shared expertise and have it be less of a, if we want to use academic L&D speak, we could say moving from this sage on the stage to the guide on the side. That to me is one of the critical dependencies of a solid cohort program. If this is still pushed down, let me tell you how this is going to be. Not to say, is it better? Yes, absolutely better. Don't want to say it's, not better than not doing that, but is there still opportunity to expand and grow further? Yes. And I think that whole component of how do we artfully incorporate the experience and expertise of everyone involved in that cohort? Because again, personalization, I guess from an industry trends, I would add this one back to the front. Personalization is king, and it's going to be moving forward. The days of, well, we're going to cast the widest net and anybody who's not in that net is just out. It's gone. And not only because we can do better with technology, but the expectations of the workforce is higher than it's ever been. So the messaging of, sorry, you didn't meet our 80%, so you're not in. Well, first of all, there is no 80%. Every research piece I look at, I mean, we're all over the map in terms of what the workforce wants. So there is no, well, we can do this and it'll work type of a thing. So hopefully that helps, Deborah, in terms of some of the thinking. I think there's some easy wins we can do. Some of the best scrappy cohort programs I've seen have been about what are the key things we're trying to drive? How do we drive discussion and experience sharing around these things? Let's sit back. I commented on a LinkedIn post yesterday where I think one of the best things L&D can do to put learning at the center of work is actually get off the stage, get out of there. Stop trying to be center stage, stop trying to be in the spotlight, actually step back and figure out how to artfully facilitate that. And that's not just live. We can do that digitally. There's ways we can, the whole concept of invisible L&D, I think, is a huge component to that. So to your question is, yes, I absolutely think so. I think there's a couple different ways we can think about it. And I think there's just logistical and planning things that you may need to think differently about depending on how you're approaching it. That also, again, does tie to coaching and mentoring, though, because we're talking about that. So might you be able to augment a cohort program or actually fully integrate something like this? Yes. So, and I would encourage people to, so that a coaching or mentoring initiative doesn't feel like this off subset random thing. You can actually give it something to anchor it to and say, okay, as part of this, we're actually anchoring this to this and that. But again, do not underestimate the logistical and resource planning that goes along with that. The other one is I'm seeing a lot happen with creativity of content. I absolutely love what I'm seeing with content. One of the things that I am happy to be seeing more and more of is job aid is slowly, but it's surely becoming less of a dirty word. It's not something that we're seeing as less than, oh, well, we could do something great, but instead we're going to do a job aid. I'm seeing platforms being used to creatively create content in new and different ways, more quickly, more targeted, a little more personalized, that we're able to do things with that. And I think that's fantastic. I would encourage people to continue to do that. I've been talking with a number of instructional designers kind of over the past coming months, trying to help them shape. I think one of the biggest shifts that we have from a content development standpoint, this is kind of a mindset and skill shift that we have to make, is I think there's still a bit of a hold on, our identities wrapped in the tools or the things that we've historically built. So as an example, you may have been very familiar with Articulate, and I'm just using that because that's a tool that everybody in our industry is familiar with. You may be very familiar with it. You may be very comfortable with that. The risk with that is your identity can become part of that, and you can start to kind of see, well, the only way I can express my creativity or skill is within the confines of this tool. Is there opportunity to do that? Yes, I've seen some people, and again, some of the stuff the contest 7 Taps has run, watching what people do with that platform is mind-blowing, the way people think about it and the way they're using it for comms and change management and organizational change. It's significant, but we have to be careful that we don't get too tied with the tool that we end up saying, well, this is how we have to use this. And so the way I express my creativity is in creating different user experiences or creating a completely different look and feel. Well, maybe but maybe not. And in fact, going back to this burden that we have the potential to be putting on our workforce, we need to be really, really careful right now that we are not adding undue burden to the workforce through our expression of creativity, the way we think, well, wouldn't it be great if we could, create this elaborate experience for people? Well, maybe, but if it feels like a lot of work for the end user, or every time they run into this piece of content, they go, good grief, I've got to relearn the whole interface. That's not it. And I think the shift that is happening, that continues to need to happen, is to think about, how do we help people disconnect their identities from the activities that they've historically done? This isn't just in learning. So back to industry trends, this is happening everywhere. We are not a unicorn in this space. A lot of the workforce is in a bit of an identity crisis right now, figuring out, who am I in this new world? All these new skills are coming at me. Does this mean I'm less than, I don't have as much value? It's hitting facilitators. It's hitting instructional designers. It's hitting marketers. It's hitting operators. It's hitting salespeople. So I think the component of this that we can do internally is to help our teams. If you're a senior L&D leader, help them identify what are the skills underneath the activities, not the activities. Let's shift away from focusing on, you are great because you did this thing, and you are great because in this thing, you were able to perform this, you were able to find this, you were able to do that. And when we can bring those skills out, we can start to unlock the potential of our teams, which ultimately is going to change the way we think about learning, the way we think about our designs, the way we think about implementation. And instead of, again, going back to the trend of, we got to move away from trying to create our own island of experience and say, you know what, it's not really about us, because our value is not tied to whether or not people know they're going to our destinations. That's not what the value is. That's not the value we bring. But if we're not careful, that's where that identity piece can get wrapped up, and we can continue clawing for market share and mind share of the workforce, and actually end up in a competition, which is contributing to workplace burnout, a bad user experience, attrition. I mean, it's actually contributing to these things. And I don't think we always see the ripple effects we can have on workforce behavior, workforce well-being, overall attitude and engagement. We play a big role in this. Not to say we're the third leg holding up the stool, no, but we do play an integral role. So I think that's something we can be thinking about as we think about the creativity we express and the identity and value we're bringing to the organization. So that's that one. The other one that is in early, I would say I'm seeing it grow and grow even in analyst trends. More and more analysts are talking about this. I would say more organizations are prioritizing this. And this is really around performance enablement, largely in digital transformation. You've heard me talk a lot this year about digital adoption technology. That's not because I have some bend to push dApps as the cornerstone of the learning ecosystem. It's due to the fact that our workforce is getting crushed by the number of systems they're being asked to use. I mean, these things are changing all the time. We're changing our HCM, we're changing our Office suite, we're changing anyway, you get the gist of it. We're changing these major platforms that people are using on a regular basis. And even if we're not changing the platform itself, they're updating, they're changing interfaces, they're changing workflows. These things are happening on a regular basis. And there's opportunity for us to lean in on this in two ways. Yes, there's the learning in the flow of work. Sure. Can we do a better job of providing real-time support and guidance to people when they need it, where they need it, whatever phrase you want to use around workflow learning? Sure, there's absolutely opportunity to do that. But if we start peeling back kind of the traditional L&D layers of the onion, there's also tremendous opportunity for us to improve business process. I mean, this is significant. We can not only improve business process, ensure greater effectiveness of business process, delivering better outcomes. We can start to get into the space of identifying where is process actually breaking down. A lot of times these decisions are made based on what we know. And the reality is we don't know as much as we think we do. Having that digital layer on there to be able to identify what's really happening, where is it breaking down, where are we having issues, what's actually going on with the way work is happening, That kind of visibility is the kind of data that allows us to shift from this idea of, well, we want to be more proactive. We don't want to be order takers. Well, that's great. But in order to get there, you've got to have the data and the visibility and the understanding of what's actually happening so you can see problems before they get out of control. And I think there's an opportunity for us as learning and development leaders to be strategic partners and be able to do this. And that's where you're going to hear me continue to push, hey, there's opportunity for us to actually improve business process, prove process effectiveness through some of our tech stack. And this, I will tell you, if this is new territory to you, it is unfamiliar territory, even for some of the most seasoned leaders in our space right now, because this is not a flag we have historically carried. So you're going to be talking to people you may not be super familiar with talking to. Again, the opportunity for us to expand our horizons and our horizontal is huge right now. I mentioned earlier in industry trends, are the functional boundaries degrading right now? Yes, in many ways. In learning and development, should we be tearing those boundaries down and actually trying to scale across the horizontal? Probably in many regards more than a lot of functions. And this is an area of opportunity for us. I think the other piece with this performance enablement is the reality that going back to workforce burden, they are crushed right now. I mean, people are asking, please, how are we supposed to get this stuff done? You know, I mean, I'm remote, I'm burned out, I have more to do than I know what to do with. There is a lot of waste in the system, especially when we think about technology. There is a lot of waste that we ask people to go through. And a term that I've been using and socializing is there's opportunity for us to focus on anti-learning as much as there is learning. And I think this is the intentional removal of learning opportunities where we say, why do you need to learn that? I don't think you do. I think we can actually take that off your plate. Why don't we automate that? Why don't we remove the need for you to have to do that or even be involved in analyzing or making this decision? Now, granted, you've heard me talk about, decision making, so don't turn that over to the machines just yet. But is there opportunity for us to consider this? Yes. So I will continue to bang the drum of performance enablement support. Are there technologies? Yeah, they're catching up. And I would say, again, are they ahead of where most organizations are? Yeah. Now, is that to be doom and gloom? No, this is just opportunity for us to say, hey, there's a high bar we can shoot for, and there's some real opportunity for us to showcase what we can do if we'll take it. The other one that I'm gonna touch base on is at a very quick level. I'm not going to go into the depth of this, but immersive tech, if this is not something you are familiar with, you need to find an opportunity to familiarize yourself with it. You'll hear me say this pretty frequently. I feel right now like the conversation around immersive tech is very similar to the conversations I had in the 90s about the internet. A lot of, yeah, it's this thing, I'm not really sure where it's going to go. Don't know really whether or not this fits my needs or my org. You give it a few years and we're going to be looking back going, oof, I wish we'd been in front of this. So again, the tech is democratizing. Getting one of these things, having one, familiarizing yourself and normalizing this tech, there's opportunity to do it without massive investments, this used to be something you had to plan and budget and annual, negotiate to get this thing in. This is something you can do and just step into it. And I would actually encourage people to do that. If you're thinking immersive tech and you're not even familiar with it and you think your jumping off point is some massive immersive tech initiative, I would actually encourage you to dial it back and say, well, maybe don't start there. If you start there, you are going to get overwhelmed. You are going to feel like this is too much to handle out of the gate. Even some of the basics of familiarizing yourself with what are some of the ways that we can use this. You might have seen some posts from me about Horizon workrooms and alt space. Are there ways we can just get people in the tech, start normalizing what this looks like? Yes, there are. And I would encourage people to do it because it will come. Whether you realize it or not, it's coming for you. And the opportunity for us to capitalize on this is now. And is everybody going to be in a position where every employee in your organization is going to have one of these things sitting on their desk in the next 6 months? I don't think so. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's enough going on with meta and just reputational. There's enough going on with the hardware. We've still got some work to do to get to that point, but are we going to get there? I think so. And I think this opportunity for us to think about, how does this become just part of the employee experience? How does this just become something that is normal? Just like I have no problem picking up my phone and sending a text or jumping on an app and approving something. How do we get to a point where I need to be in an event or I need to be at something, and rather than having to get in my car, jump on a plane and go there, how do we just seamlessly bridge the gap? Is this going to happen overnight? No. Do I think very many orgs are going to be there in 2022? No. But is this one of the areas we really have an opportunity as a function, as an industry, to get ahead of it? And again, small steps. You don't need to go buy 20,000 headsets as part of your next initiative. Is there an opportunity for you personally to at least familiarize yourself with it? I can't tell you how many people I talk to who have a very strong and distinct point of view on what's going on with immersive tech that have never even thrown on a headset. And so I think that's the gap that we can fill right now, is to at least figure out, how do we get ourselves to a point where we at least know enough to be dangerous. I think that's the state that everyone should be at right now. And we've got some room to bridge that gap. Enough on that, because you're going to see more of that if you're part of the community. Next month, I'm actually hosting a hybrid experience that's going to be a mix of, traditional virtual and VR environments in one space. So I think the opportunity for people to see, what does that look like? If you have a headset, great. If you don't, well, you can participate through traditional means, but at least get a view into how might we be able to think about this. And this ties back to hybrid learning, because going back to my point earlier, hybrid learning is not about running two programs in parallel. One is analog, one is virtual digital. It's about saying, how do we do these things seamlessly and optimize the best of both worlds and use them as though there is no barrier between the two? And are we there yet? No, we're not. And I would say, if you're hearing this and going, wow, I'm not even close. Okay, most people aren't. You're not alone in that. And that's why I'm saying, I think anything folks can do to start to normalize that, at least familiarize themselves, get some exposure at this point, is extremely valuable. Because what I don't want to see is us to be in reactionary mode, where all of a sudden this is on everybody's desk, this is in everyone's hands, and we're still sitting back going, okay, how do we integrate the LMS with the headset? Wrong question to be asking. Wrong question to be asking. Wrong direction to be going with it. And I think the only way you're going to avoid that pothole, avoid that pitfall, is to actually familiarize yourself with it and start thinking about, as we think about employee experience, what is experiential and how does this play into that? Last on this, and then I'll talk about the one that's not being talked about that I think we need to continue digging into. But the last one I had on my list of this was the skill analysis. Toby. So Toby's point, and I will validate this. Once you use immersive, it's really hard to look back. And I think the same is true with a lot of things. Cohort learning, thinking different about content design. Once you've experienced that, what good looks like, it is really hard to try and to go back across the bridge. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It doesn't go back in. And again, is it true with immersive? Yes. And I think that's where opportunity for us to orient ourselves and familiarize is there. But I don't think it's just that. And that's where, again, cohort learning, if you haven't been through a good cohort program, do it. Find one, talk to somebody who's been involved with one, experience it. If you haven't experienced a really solid coaching program, get some exposure to it. I think that the days of making decisions based on what we think it could look like we've got to move past that. So the last one is this whole skills analysis and measurement. This is still, to me, still very early stage. If I were to talk about what's happening in the tech space and the vendor space, only a handful of players, in my opinion, are actually delving into this and doing it in a meaningful, impactful way. And what I mean by that is thoughtfully and quantifiably analyzing what's going on with the skills in your organization. How does that relate to industry trends? How do we actually surgically diagnose what's happening and where are the needs? And what does that mean as we think about talent mobility or workforce planning or retention, or even just strategic planning for our orgs? Do we have a lot of that yet? I would say no, it's not there. There are a handful of players, and again, I'm not going to get into the names game because different spaces, different places on this, and my conversation would change based on the maturity of the org. But there are a handful that are here. I think this is something that to the tech folks listening, opportunity for maturity here. And learning leaders, we need to push for this, because going back to my very early point, if we're not the ones pushing for it, the market's going to do what we push for. If we're still just asking for a better user experience for content, well, that's where the market's going to focus. If we're saying we need quantifiable details on what's going on with skills, how do we actually have a taxonomy and ontology that we can work with that's actually adaptive and moving, not something we do once, we can't touch it for another 3 years. And so by the time we actually do anything with it, it's irrelevant. And how are we actually measuring on a constant, continual, iterative basis? This is the opportunity. I mentioned this in a conversation, and I continue to mention this. Skills are the ones and zeros of our organizations. And this is where I don't necessarily think our organizations or even we as an industry realize how much power we have in the direction of things. Now, is that to say we control everything? No, give me a break. No, we're not in charge of this stuff. But are we the raw code? Do we have the potential to change the code of the organization, to actually shift and pivot the org to be able to deploy and deliver on what we need to do as an organization? We do. And can we get to a point where we can predictively do that and truly be and you'll see a post about it tomorrow, a silent partner to our organizations? Do we need to be out front shouting from the rooftops? No, but is there opportunity for us to actually steer this ship more than we realize? Yes. Is the tech there yet? I think in some areas it is definitely coming along. There are some I've seen that are extremely impressive with what they can do in terms of speed, how quantifiability, the ability to adapt, not be this once and done thing. Yes. Is it completely mature? No. And has that all tied into everything so that instead of it being this kind of separate silo, we're getting there. We're getting there. Is it starting to tie in? Yes. So again, huge opportunity for us as we look at this. Things I think any learning leader should be focused on. I think it's important if you're an instructional designer or a training specialist, if you're in the ranks and you're thinking, what does this have to do with me? Well, one, if you want career latitude in learning and development, this is a huge area to start thinking about and focusing on, because these strategic discussions are what's going to get L&D in the C-suite. But two, this does directly impact how you think about this and the work that you do. It affects the way you design. It affects the way you facilitate. It affects everything about what we do as an operation, because ultimately we are a product. L&D is a product, and we deliver products, and the effectiveness and quality of our product is completely dependent on our whole operation. The last piece, and then I'm going to wrap on this one, is as this continues to grow, as digital becomes the underpinning of essentially everything we do, which it's becoming that it has for a while now, but it's only growing. We're going to see this in everywhere. The real reality that as an organization, as leaders, we may know more about our workforce than they know about ourselves is real. That is a ethical and moral risk we have to assess. And again, this goes back to just like the coaching. Assuming that our workforce will be just fine and dandy with that and totally comfortable. I mean, yes, there's the regulatory implications, the ethical implications of this. Is there the possibility for a doomsday social media trend to happen in our space? Yeah, I think we're further off from that. But I think the trust, the comfort our workforce has with this, the digital acumen of employees is rising quickly. Is it still lagging? Yes. But is it rising quickly? It's rising quickly. And on top of it, here's the thing. Like a lot of things, when people don't have the answers, they're going to fill in the gaps. And chances are the gaps and what they're going to fill in those gaps, it's not going to be positive intent. It's not going to be always the good thing. So this is, again, an opportunity for us. If you're starting to toy in more of these digital systems, if you're starting to do more around analytics and behavioral tracking and what's going on in terms of workforce behavior, now's the time to get in front of it from a make sure your workforce is informed, make sure they understand what you're doing, make sure they understand the why, and that your messaging and the change management behind this is strong. Because if you don't, there is a real risk this could all blow back on the organization, again contributing to the risks our organizations are already facing in terms of competitive talent market, burnout, things like that, where people just feel like, man, now you're pulling this on us. I mean, you see the privacy stuff happening right now. Again, I'm not going to go into this because this could be a whole nother episode, but just something I want to put on the forefront for people to be thinking about as they continue to trend down this digital path. So with that, this was my last minute pivot. Hopefully you're able to take something from the conversation. Hopefully it just got you thinking a little bit about some of these biggest things that I'm personally seeing spur up in 2022 or grow that have been in place. I think that's it. And I hope you have a great Tuesday and a great rest of your week. I will be back next week. And yeah, I think that's it. If you have any other questions, you can always join the community and ask right directly there, or message me on LinkedIn. Always love engaging with folks. Again, have a wonderful one, and we will see you soon.